Hope everybody had a great holiday. I haven't been online for a little while on account of that. But today we're going to continue this series on Dorico workflow, and specifically it started out with this idea of how do we use action strings, which is a Native Instruments phrase-based string instrument in something like Dorico. And that's taking us through a whole series of steps here to create what's called a playback template, which I'm going to be adding to that discussion today by talking about endpoints. So if you're a Dorico user, you've encountered endpoints, and I want to explain what they are, why you want to use them, and then how to use them. I'm going to show you two examples today. Now, this is a part in a series because this whole topic, this whole umbrella topic, is too much to discuss really in one live stream. I wanted to chop it up. So the endpoint, what is it? An endpoint is essentially a way of connecting a specific VST instrument, right? So some kind of virtual instrument with some kind of, sorry, I'm keeping an eye on my streaming cache here because I've been having, I need to keep an eye on my internet. So I might dodge off like that every now and then. A VST instrument, a virtual instrument with an expression map. So an expression map, which we talked about in the last lesson, is really a mechanism for describing what key switches, let's say, should be triggered in the event of your score saying pizzicato or staccato or something like that. How does the instrument respond? How should it respond to what's in your notation? That's what an expression map is. And the expression map then needs has another layer of convenience built into Dorico where you can kind of attach it to an instrument so that next time you load that instrument, it'll load the expression map. Because otherwise, every time you load an instrument, you'd have to load the expression map that matches it, and that would potentially be kind of inconvenient. So the endpoint configuration is a way to bring these two together. So you have one unit, and it's the instrument, and it's the expression map. You get everything you need. Next time, we're going to talk about playback templates. And playback templates are where you bring a bunch of endpoints together into one kind of like a project. And I'll get into that next time. Again, too much to talk about in one. So that's what they are. Why you want to use them? Basically to save time. So you go through a lot of work when you configure a specific virtual instrument to work with specific key switches. And even though it's nice to know, well, I've saved my expression map, I could load it onto my instrument at any point in time, that is something you're going to have to do on every project. And generally speaking, you don't want to have multiple expression maps for the same instrument. At least that's not my experience. So every time I load up a particular instrument like Stradivari viola, or Stradivari cello, I know I want the same expression map. It's just annoying if I have to go and load it on. So that's why you want to use endpoint configurations, because it unites these two things in a way that improves your workflow. So it's just a matter of creating the instrument instance in your Dorico project, and then the key switch is going to work right. You can go in and start notating. And the idea behind my whole series here is to move you as quickly to the point of composing as possible. That's certainly my preference, to always, I want to write. I want to be creative. I don't want to spend time configuring technology. So now I'm going to demonstrate this for you. I'm going to do two demos. I'm going to create a single endpoint. So what does it look like when you have an endpoint for one instrument? And then how do you create an endpoint for an entire ensemble? So this is a case where, well, I'll get into the demos and I'll kind of discuss case points as I go. So let's switch over here to my screen and take a look at this Dorico project. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit play so you can kind of hear what's going on. Okay, so nothing really crazy going on there. I don't need a fifth bar in here, so I'll just delete that. Okay, so I want to look in my play mode up here when you're dealing with endpoints. So we're going to go to play. Once again, I see my two staffs, but now they're represented as kind of tracks, right? I have action strings in my cello. And over here on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, sorry, for the instrument that I have chosen, I can see which virtual instrument is there, right? So this has got action strings, this has got my Stradivari cello. You can see things like what's the port and MIDI number and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get too much into this except to say that this is the track inspector for whatever you have selected, but you can also go here and see all the VST instruments and MIDI plugins that are set up for this entire project, this entire Dorico project. So I've got a solo cello as well as Stradivari cello, and I've got action strings. Now, I'm really only using action strings and the Stradivari cello. We can tell that here because I've got two tracks. One's connected to action strings, the other's connected to Stradivari cello. We don't actually have a track connected to the Berkeley solo cello, but as things are, every time you add a new instrument into your VST rack there, they stay there unless you explicitly get rid of them. And generally, which I'll discuss, generally the way that I get rid of them is with playback templates, and that's really going to be in lessons later on in this series. But when you load a playback template, it's basically going to throw away all your VST instruments and then reload just the ones that you need. So that is the preferred way to get rid of the ones you're not using. All right, so let's get back to this. Let's say that I come in here, I've got my Stradivari cello set up here, and it's selected in my track inspector. That's the instrument that I have selected for this particular track. Right here, there's this endpoint setup, this kind of like cog. And if I go ahead and click on that, I get this window over here. So this is saying that it's currently assigned to violoncello. Whatever it's assigned to up here, like whichever of these tracks, if I assigned it to action strings, then under assigned instruments here, it would say action strings. This is kind of an arbitrary thing, but this is the instrument it's going to look up next time, right? So next time you load this endpoint and it wants to load it up, it's going to be looking for, it's going to use violoncello as either the name that it names a track, or if it's reloading onto an existing track, it's going to look for that before it loads this endpoint onto it. Then I have expression map here. Now, if I just select it, it turns blue, and this can be a little confusing. You have to double click it, and then you get a drop-down box, and this is all my expression maps. So I can decide which expression map I want to use on this instrument right here. So I hit OK, and it applies. But let's take a look at this save endpoint configuration. Now, whatever the name was that I typed up here, it's going to use right here. I can save it. And this is actually, let me see, is it ask me to, no. Sometimes if you're saving over one that you've saved before, there you go. It'll say, do you want to overwrite? You say, yes, that's fine, right? So what I've got here at this point is an endpoint configuration saved that connects violoncello with this expression map and this instrument, because violoncello is connected to my Stradivari cello, and that has all of these different configurations. I can look at the actual instrument right here, like so. So this is my contact instrument. So my endpoint has saved this instrument along with the expression map that I selected right here, and it's saved it all as what's called an endpoint configuration. Now, another approach we can take is I can say, okay, I've got my whole ensemble here, and I can save that as an endpoint configuration. And I could save this as, string duo, or, that's just a name I'm picking out of a hat. But you name the endpoint configuration, and when you're saving the endpoint configuration from here, you're saving all these instruments together. So you might want to do this for a specific ensemble, right? So I've also got an endpoint configuration here for action strings 2 and an expression map that I made for action strings 2, right? So these endpoints are saved independently. If I go to action strings 2 and I save this as action strings 2, which is again whatever name is typed in up here, then I get an action strings 2 endpoint saved. Now, if I wanted to look at endpoints, that's going to be visible up here in the play menu. If I go down to playback template and I open one, then I can see in this playback template concept and structure I'll get into in a future lesson. I'm not going to dive into it a lot here because we're already at 10 minutes. But this list of entries, it's kind of a misnomer. This should, instead of saying entries, it should say endpoint configurations, because that's what all of these are, is a list of endpoint configurations within, this playback template. But when you come here into editing, you can actually click this endpoint configurations, and this is where you'd find all your endpoint configurations. I've got one called action strings 2. I've got one called phrases, single articulations. If I scroll down, I will find my Stradivari cello right here. So this is where you could find them, and you could click the trash can if you wanted to delete them. And this happened to me where I was creating in preparation for this lesson. I created a bunch of endpoint configurations with just slightly different names, but they all represented the same thing. So I came in here and I deleted all the ones that I didn't want. Now, I don't actually want this one, so I'll get rid of it. Go ahead and hit OK. Gonna hit OK. And basically, if I were to create a playback template, which I'll get into next time, I add these two endpoint configurations to it. I select it here, hit apply and close, and when I do, which I'll demonstrate next time, it's going to wipe out these instruments. It's going to reload action strings 1 and violoncello just the way that they are right now with these endpoint configurations. So if you have any questions about how these endpoint configurations work, or there's an aspect of this you'd like me to discuss in the next lesson when I engage about playback templates, please leave your questions in the comments. Thank you so much. Please like and subscribe. It really helps me surface this video. It seems like this is a topic a lot of people are interested in, so I'm psyched about that. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Hopefully it'll just be a couple of days and I will be back on and we'll pick up on this whole topic of playback templates, endpoint configurations, instruments, and blah, blah, blah. All right. See you next time.